Hello, friends, and welcome to Empty Cloud Monastery for another episode of Monk Chat. I am not on the screen. We have another Bhikkhuni present, which is Aya Suvijana, in case you were wondering, and you're already familiar with Bhante Sudazo and probably with Tanmisa, who's been with us for the past 2 weeks. So welcome to our friends, Gita, Jens, Rosalinda, Elaine, Mary, Denise, good to see you. Hello, Adine, Eric, welcome. Angela and Kauser friend, welcome friends. So whenever you have questions, you feel free to type them in the live chat and our venerables will try their best to answer them. Elaine says, not a question, an observation and a comment. Yeah, those are welcome too. So Elaine says, I am thrilled to see the growth that Buddhist Insights has made and rejoice in your success. Oh, thank you. Are we having success? Your efforts, particularly during the pandemic, have been noble. Oh, thank you very much. You make the Buddha proud. Oh, and are observing of the robes, I think. With deep gratitude, I wish you all blessings. Oh, thank you so much. That's very sweet, Elaine. We try our best. And that was all for tonight.
Shortest monk chat in the history of monk chat.
Oh.
I'd like to hear about Aya Suvijana's path here a bit.
Yeah, please also ask questions to yourselves and then answer them.
Dear Bhante Sudaso.
Aya, did you tell us where you're coming from right now, or
Oh,
just a bit about you?
well, originally, my Anagarika novice and Bhikkhuni ordination occurred with the Dhammadharini community. I had Tataloka as my preceptor, and so I've been there for about 14 years and done a little bit of traveling. And most recently, I was at Heartwood Refuge for 5 months in North Carolina, and also at the Charlotte Buddhist Vihara in North Carolina for about 2 weeks. So I'm just exploring now. Have enough health to travel about like this, and happy to be here at Empty Cloud. I've been here just a few days, so I'm fully vaccinated, so I'm now feeling free to travel. So yeah, I don't know if that's what you were.
Yeah, definitely. Just a bit about that.
Yeah, so.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Venerable, for sharing. The entire community at Empty Cloud, actually. Well, Tanmisa got fully vaccinated today, and the rest of the community will get fully vaccinated tomorrow. So great, thanks. Oh, good to see you, Ki, as well. Good friend from Australia. And Nadine is asking, how widespread is Bhikkhuni ordination currently in Theravada circles? Is there still resistance? Well, I think this is a good question for Venerable Suvijana, who's probably more updated than the other venerables on the subject matter.
Yeah, I haven't recently, but heard the recent statistics. But actually, in Sri Lanka and Thailand, it's growing pretty fast. And but it's still bhikkhunis are really a significant minority compared to the bhikkhus, and but there are growing communities in both Thailand, and there's about other people might know the statistics a little bit better, but I think there's at least 4 major bhikkhuni communities. They keep the smaller ones keep popping up, and I'm not keeping track of all of it. But within the the nationals of that country are forming communities, and then there's a new it's a new kampa in
Venerable Chanda.
Chanda in Britain,
Mhm.
and I'm not sure how that's going, but so there's smaller. So it's starting to spread more, grow slowly, I think. But the past since I was in Anagarika, it's really grown tremendously. The opportunities are increasing. So I think it's progress, and it's slow, but I think within the Theravada, it's very still. There's a lot less support and a lot less opportunities than it is for the men. But in the Bay Area, actually, San Francisco Bay Area, I think there's 2, 3, and then there's in near Sacramento. There's another one, and they're smaller. I mean, it's like we're talking about. Now they're starting to be, as far as ordained women together, there are 2, 3, 4 groups, and then with novices and anagarikas. The populations, of course, always are changing. In Thailand and Sri Lanka, I know there's much larger communities, but I don't know what the numbers are right now. I couldn't tell you.
I haven't looked recently, but last I did, there was a bit over 100 bhikkhunis in Thailand these days. Sri Lanka, it's in the thousands, but I don't remember the exact number.
I think 5,000, if I remember correctly,
5,000
in Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
And actually a lot more than 100 in Thailand.
Yeah,
my numbers may be quite old. They may be quite out of date.
I was thinking somewhere around 300, but I could be.
300, okay.
Yeah,
Somewhere.
she really gets stuff done, so it hasn't been going on for that long, but but there's more. It's definitely growing, and if there is still resistance, I would add, yes, but we're all going against the stream, so it's good exercise for those muscles.
How recent was the Sri Lankan movement in terms of bhikkhuni ordination? Like how long is that? Those communities
The
been
90s.
growing?
Yeah, 1990s. Yeah.
Okay, so 25 years.
Yeah.
Mhm.
They have, I think a lot of the Dasasila matas have been converting. First, they were resistant to it, but then the ones that were this. I heard this interview a couple of years ago, but there was some that were initially resistant to it, and then they decided to take higher ordination after pondering it for a while, probably. One of the problems is some of the women have been in monastic life, in a monastic form for decades, and then when they receive full ordination, they lose their seniority. But they can do what they can do within their communities is ordain an order and have the senior most ones, remaining senior. But as far as international community, then there's, what they've given up their seniority as, but they're not even recognized as being ordained in their past monastic form. But so that was one of the difficulties I was hearing, the conversion. And then the fact that their form wasn't being seen as significant or respected, even though they're probably pretty advanced practitioners and teachers and, important roles in society. It's so.
Yeah, well, thank you to all the venerables for sharing your thoughts. And if you want to see more bhikkhunis in this world, you can support bhikkhunis. So I'm going to put a nice link to the Alliance for Bhikkhunis that is based in California and does incredible work. So the website is now currently on our chat. So you can see actually all the monasteries in the world, and you can also support them. 2 in 1, great. Denise says, welcome, Ayasui Janam. Where are you visiting us from? But I think you answered that already. Thanks to Kamlisa Bro, who read Denise's mind and asked this question ahead. The superpower, purified eye. And Rosalina is asking, venerables, what would be the correct realization of impermanence? Would it lead to a feeling of regret and urgency to practice before it's too late, or would it be something else? Venerable Sudasan?
I would not say regret. That would be an odd response. Urgency for practice. I mean, I hope that you already have urgency for practice. But no, the recognition of impermanence for me actually brings a deep sense of peace. It's relaxation, realizing that since everything is insubstantial, there is no point in trying to hold on to anything. And that's an enormous load off of one's shoulders. It's an enormous relief. So for me, developing the meditation on impermanence is it's enormously comforting. It's not distressing in any way.
Great.
Were you going to say something?
I'm thinking about what's motivating the question, and I think it depends on if it's a insight, really deep insight into impermanence, or just a recognition of the condition of the world, that everything that arises passes, and seeing it on a more, I want to say mundane level, but seeing it realistically. I mean, a lot of people are even in denial of their own death and have a really hard time with any kind of loss. So I think there's like different levels of understanding impermanence and working with it, seeing it, being familiar with it, getting over the denial of it. Yeah, it's definitely brings a lot of peace of mind, because a lot of dukkha comes from that's called the vipalasas, where you want to see something as permanent when it's actually impermanent. And so we fool ourselves all the time, or we're in denial all the time. So when we can just, instead of being fearful and trying to resist this important kind of law of reality, to be at ease with it, learn to be at ease with it. So there's different kinds of meditations and different depths that one can get at the realization of anicca. But it's all aimed at being at ease with things as they are, being at peace with things as they are, instead of creating more dukkha for ourselves, trying to fight it.
Thank you, Venerable. And maybe Tandisabo has something else to add, or we can go to the next question too.
Yeah, I mean, I think those ways of looking at it are, I really like the recollection of the peacefulness of it. But I think it also can, there's a term in the suttas called, which is samvega. And it's a really interesting term. I still don't know. Bhante, how have you translated it?
It's very difficult to give a one-word translation. You kind of need a whole paragraph.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing. So, you know, for example, where it comes up in the suttas is it comes up plenty, but there's a sort of aristocrat, and there's a party at his house, and it ends, and everyone's sleeping and all, you know, sprawled out on the floor, and he just looks around and he realizes that he just sees everyone as so many kind of bodies, and he just sees through it all in a second. And so I think there's seeing impermanence in our lives in situations like that, where you suddenly see that it's not something to be held on to. And I think that can issue into depression for people if that's all it is. But I think if there's also an intuition of the path, then it can become something much bigger or much deeper. And this is, in the story, the royal son walks out of the house and goes and finds the Buddha and ordains. And I know that, I think that's one of the great gifts that the spiritual path of Buddhism gives to the world is, I think a lot of people see through at some level what we've been given and promised by society, but where do you turn when there's no ideal higher than that really articulated in our society? And I think that, you know, the Buddha says that suffering either results in a search, bewilderment, or a search. And I know that so many people tend to be caught in this cycle of bewilderment, but that if you do see impermanence and then in your life, and then that results in actually turning towards a path which ennobles and justifies a life. And I think we intuitively feel what that means in terms of living a life truly worthy of our death and dedicated towards awakening. Then that's the whole meaning of Samvega. It's the turn. It's the prisoner in Plato's cave becoming tired of the shadows and turning their head back towards the exit. You know, and that for me is the difference between that and depression. But I think it all does start with that impermanence perception.
Sadhu, thank you very much, Venerable. It was beautiful. And Alma is asking, Anita actually says, good evening, this is Anita. My question from this morning about obtaining samadhi. If not breath, then what would you suggest? So I'll pass it on to Bhaktisiddhanta since that was originally asked to him this morning.
Yeah, so as I said this morning, mindfulness of the body. So picking some part or region of the body to center your attention on. And I normally center attention on my hands. But you can also choose your abdomen or your tailbone or anywhere, really, it's fine. Another great option is metta. So loving kindness meditation. As you practice loving kindness meditation, you can start to notice that there is a feeling of loving kindness. So it's not a physical feeling exactly, but it's a feeling in the mind. So that feeling of benevolence. And you can focus on the feeling of benevolence, the feeling of metta. And that can be a very powerful way of entering samadhi. So that's technically a mental object rather than a physical object. Other options, Ajahn Sumedho spoke about the sound of silence. So that's a technique that some people have had success with. I played with it a bit many years ago, but never really went far with it. Wasn't really wasn't really my thing. I think Venerable Nisabo has had more success with it a little bit.
That's my main object, though.
It is?
No.
Oh.
Secondary.
There's also a relatively advanced form of combined samatha vipassana, which in the Pali tradition is called animitta samadhi, objectless samadhi. But people are usually more familiar with it in the Chan practice or Zen practice. Silent illumination or shikantaza. It's a form of samadhi practice which is incorporates vipassana, incorporates insight. Traditionally, they're spoken of as being a few dozen samadhi objects, but most of them are quite dependent upon the person and are things that you need to be in communication with the teacher around. So the kasina meditations, so meditations on abstractions, such as meditating on various colors, those are practices which work well for some people, but can produce unproductive results in other people. So the kasina meditations are samadhi practices which should only be done in close consultation with a meditation teacher. You don't practice those on your own. The 4 elements, normally I teach the 6 elements as an insight meditation practice, but you can also do any of the first 4 elements as a samadhi practice alone. Gunnar, please sit in a dignified way. Thank you. So you can do the earth element, just focusing on the earth-like aspect of the body experience, its solidity, its hardness. The water element, heat element, wind element. So each one of those can be used as a samadhi object. So those are a few that come to mind. Venerables, do you have any other samadhi objects you'd like to add to the list?
I think they've all been mentioned. Yeah, I guess it depends on the depth of samadhi. And I don't consider myself an expert on this, so I don't really have much to add to it right now. I think the elements, the elements were, I guess it depends on how you work with the object, and if it's a lot of movement with the elements, it may be, you were talking about one element at a time?
Yeah, one element, and just focusing on stilling the mind around the experience of that element.
Yeah, because it depends. I guess if you focus on one spot rather than a lot of movement with the element. But generally, it's supposed to only lead you to upachara or neighborhood. But it can. It's almost a combination of, well, it is a combination of insight and samadhi, vipassana and samadhi, if you're doing it actively.
So just as you're sitting, you can just feel the heaviness and weightiness of the body and just let the mind come to stillness in that experience of the heaviness of the body. And in that, it can be a very powerful samadhi practice. So as long as you're not moving the mind, then the mind can enter samadhi. That's the critical element of samadhi practice is stillness of body and stillness of mind. So to some degree, it doesn't really matter what object you use as a center point for your attention. The important thing is that body and mind don't move. That's the important thing.
Anything to add?
Right.
All right, great. We have a question
Yes,
from
I've been
the
holding
audience.
this since this morning, actually. So since we're talking about samadhi, in Bhante G's book, Beyond Mindfulness, I remember that he was talking about samadhi. And he mentioned Kanika samadhi, and he mentioned 3 levels to samadhi. So this is aimed at Bhante Sudaso, if anyone can answer this, if you could briefly explain the different types of samadhi and why he made Kanika samadhi is separate, whereas other teachers have not separated Kanika samadhi from the 3 stages.
So the distinction of Kanika Samadhi, Upachara Samadhi, and I think the third one was referring to jhana, first jhana. Apana Samadhi.
Which some teachers say is jhana as well. Depends.
Anyway, the classification comes from the commentaries, from the Visuddhimagga and the commentaries, which I don't refer to at all because they diverge significantly from the suttas. And especially in how the subject of samadhi and jhana are handled, the Visuddhimagga and the commentaries just jump completely off the cliff and wander off into the clouds somewhere. So I don't go that way. I just follow the suttas. So the term Kanika Samadhi is not used in the suttas. The Buddha does mention temporary liberation in a handful of places, but that just seems to be talking about samadhi, possibly jhana practice, but where the mind is temporarily relatively pure, temporarily free of defilement. But the concept of Kanika Samadhi is, again, this seems to be a commentarial invention, and therefore it's not something that I talk about.
Great. Thank you to all the valuables. And Bhavani is asking, I think Anapanasati is very complicated, difficult, confusing, and has lots of variants or various methods. How to get clear understanding of Anapanasati? Well, since we just had a special Anapanasati where both bhikkhus shared, I'll pass this on to Venerable Suvijana so we also have another perspective, so you can get more confused and hear a different variant of their method.
Well, it is confusing. There is a lot of different ideas about the teaching, and it's I think there are people, masters who have had success in certain methodologies. They've developed them themselves, or they explored themselves. And so what works for them is what they teach, how they've mastered it is and Ta-Nisabo was talking about experimenting, trying different things with the breath and seeing what works. And I think if you have faith in a particular method and find a teacher that's teaching it, that's really helpful, because you can do a lot on your own with books, but to have somebody to be able to answer questions, what you're experiencing or where you've gotten stuck, and how to move forward. So it's really helpful to have a Kalyanamitta, to have an experienced teacher to help you. So, or retreats like the retreat that was just held. Eventually we'll be able to meet in person again at retreat centers, and also in the meantime, if you have somebody to consult with questions, like with your individual practice, what you're working with, because a lot of it is individual. It is because there are different interpretations of the teaching. They are taught different ways, and some people do have a lot of faith in the commentarial teachings, and that's because they've been working with a lineage that has passed that down and how that actually works. And So it's through experience, through experimentation, I guess you could say too. So yeah, because I've heard a lot of different teachings, from a lot of different teachers. So that's why if a certain method seems to really resonate with you, and you are working with it, and it seems like you are making some progress with it, then I would certainly seek out somebody who has mastered it.
Great, thank you, Venerable. And Eric asks, I'm curious how one begins to discern living as a Buddhist monastic. How did you all become monks? And what is some advice you might offer to someone looking into becoming a monk?
So,
Sabo? Oops.
Oh, I love Bhante Sudasa's answer to these kind of questions.
He will give us a short
I was just
answer.
going to say that we get this question all the time. Possibly one of the most commonly asked questions, but please go ahead.
But we've never heard the answer from Tanisa Moranaya Sudichara.
How I became a monk.
How one begins to discern living as a Buddhist monastic, and then how did you become a monk, and what is some advice you might offer to someone looking to becoming a monk? And Eric, don't feel bad. That was also one of my first questions when I first met a monk.
Well, it's everyone's first question.
It's a good question, you know. Yeah, speaking to this experience of Samvega, which the term we talked about, where you suddenly see something that means more than anything you've encountered before. And I remember that moment when I was 15. I read Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha, like I think many of us have. It's not actually a terribly Buddhist book, but it was my first encounter with the image of the Buddha. And I remember an intuition of golden light. And I've only had those moments where something has really spoken to me loudly a few times in my life. And yeah, I've said this before, not as articulately, but that, I think that the heart usually comes as a deer, but every now and again it comes as a lion, and like it speaks very loudly and clearly. And that was one of those times. And so ever since then, I started to practice meditation. Started with half an hour a day, and then after a while, I heard about someone who my friend had met who was meditating, I think, an hour twice a day. And I just knew that I needed to do that too. And it just became a bigger and bigger part of my life. And it became the most meaningful thing. Just, I could see how it changed everything. Everything in my life became potentized because, I was taking that time to center and clarify the heart. And I just couldn't see something a more worthy aim for my life than to work to clean the heart and to purify it. And then, yeah, I went through college and was practicing, but I was doing a lot of good things, but they all kind of felt like it all felt like it was not quite something I could give my heart to. And then I remember coming out of college, looking into grad schools and stepping into a Bayagiri monastery in Northern California, and just being so struck by the silence there, and knowing that I needed help to hold this space and to turn and confront what I was running from and what I had been running from for 10 years. And that otherwise I would dilute my life and not live a life worthy of what I thought my true purpose was. And I don't think everyone needs to or is going to become a monk necessarily, but for me, I don't think I'd be able to resist Netflix if I was out in the world. So, I that was it, and then I turned towards that. And I'd say that if one is really interested in, if one is playing with that idea to, really up one's practice to at least 2 45-minute sessions a day, and then moving towards 2-hour-long sessions a day with maybe a small session in the middle of the day, if one can take some time out of one's lunch break. Just the more time one gives to practice, the more that quiet voice of your better nature will have a chance to speak and guide you. And then just taking time to spend time in monasteries. There's no need to commit right away, but just see if the life actually fits. And take time to meet some of the teachers which are alive now. I mean, there's really amazing, men and women who I genuinely believe have attained awakening. And some of them live in America, so don't lose that opportunity. Visit monasteries, there's, Abhayagiri and elsewhere, that there's truly amazing teachers. So don't lose that opportunity. And that's what I would say. Ande, Aya?
And the question was our personal experience, and what was that?
Yeah, how did you become monks, and advice to aspirants?
Okay. It's kind of since my life is longer than these two, my story is a little longer. And I started meditating in my 20s. I was when I first heard the Four Noble Truths, there was some really strong spark, like of recognition. And I have a feeling it's lifetimes for me. But I was drawn to Zen practice, and then it's just also got involved in just family life. And then when my son, I was married, and then I had a son, and when my son was coming of age, a little bit before that, I met some monks from Abhayagiri. And I had already had a meditation practice, and I went out of it for a while since I had a family. And then it seemed like things were opening up for me as far as being an independent person, my child being independent, and things were just falling into place. The Theravada tradition, there was a much stronger kind of sense of recognition and appreciation. And I was really appreciating the fact that they were keeping the strict vinaya, and not using money, dependent on alms. And so I was living in San Francisco, and I heard about, I think, somehow I met the monks from Abhayagiri, and then I know, because I started going to the Vipassana group. I was doing Zen practice for many years, and then someone encouraged me to go to the Vipassana Santa Cruz, and then I heard about Abhayagiri. So then I was able to meet monks in that tradition, and that was very inspiring to me. So I think the inspiration of monastic life was immersing myself in it for a few days. And then I started going on retreats. But as a woman, I might have gone forth sooner if I had an opportunity. But yeah, so that I was on the track. I moved closer to Abhayagiri, and then there was I found out there was actually a fully ordained bhikkhuni in California. So I did eventually go to practice with her, and received higher ordination with it was Ayatollah. But I think the inspiration of people living the monastic life is really important. I started out by keeping 8 precepts as a layperson, and I just started to have a disinterest in what most average persons were interested in. It just, the Dhamma was just a really strong draw, and it came to be the most important thing in my life. So I think if you have this natural draw, and the Dhamma is becoming more prominent in your life, things will just unfold naturally, I think. I mean, it was just, I could go into a long story about how things unfolded in my life and how it feels like it was almost like this river channel or something that was pulling me, in the right direction, and meeting the right people at the right time. So we can facilitate that happening also, but if we have a strong desire to go forth, and these days there's a lot more opportunities available. So I think just I would say that contact, and at least be keeping 5 precepts, and try 8 precepts on Aposata days. Just see how it feels and spend time at a monastery if you can. It's a good way to test it out. And if it all seems really inspiring and natural to you, I would say go for it.
Great, thank you, Venerable. And for Bhante Sudaso's answer, you can look at all the other monk chats. And Eric also asks, so maybe Bhante Sudaso can take this question. Do Buddhist monks do much physical yoga?
Depends on the monk.
All right.
That
answer.
I think it's important to care for the body, and especially as one gets older, it doesn't necessarily have to be yoga per se, but I have actually most of my life been doing some asanas, yoga postures, and it is helpful for maintaining the ability to sit cross-legged, to sit upright. But it depends. And I think there are some monasteries that even prohibit it. And some places they actually have a yoga room. So it's like a variety of possibilities.
Thank you, Venerables. And Adine actually has a question for Aya Suvijana. Was Aya Suvijana Dhammayavati in England 2006 to 2008, around that time? She looks somehow familiar.
Was I where?
Amaravati.
Amaravati. I was at Amaravati December 2005 through April 2006.
Oh.
And I was there as a laywoman. I had hair. So
I believe Adine was an Anagarika there back in the day. So
Adine.
Maybe.
I think I do remember. Adine is from California.
Actually, Oregon, Portland.
Well, right now he's in Portland. I know that much. Right now he's in Portland.
He's in Portland. That's Oregon.
But I think
yes, it is. So.
I think yes.
Great. Maybe you're reconnecting now online. Wonderful. And Elaine says, I was honored to hear the broadcast out of Toronto a few weeks back, but felt that your questions about politics and veterinary care were not satisfactorily addressed.
Mhm.
Maybe it is me. Shamelessly, I admit I was chanting Bhante Sudaso for president. I digress. Do you feel, Ayasola and Bhante Sudaso, that your questions were satisfactorily addressed? Oh, I think for Bhante Saranapala / Venerable bodies.
I think that Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi had a lot of questions, and he was trying to give answers to all of those questions, which then means that he had less time to devote to answering each one fully. So I do think that any of the questions that were brought up during that panel discussion could have been discussed in a lot more depth. But the nature of it was that we were trying to cover a lot of questions in a short amount of time. So it wasn't possible to go deep into any one of them. But yeah, I think there's a lot more discussion to be had on that issue.
Yeah. What he said, I will answer to my part of the question.
For those who don't know, it was a question. It was a question around euthanasia and including veterinary euthanasia, which, as far as I can tell from the Buddhist teachings, it doesn't matter what word you put on it; it's still killing a sentient being, and therefore unwholesome. There were other questions around politics, but there were many, so I'm not sure which ones.
I think she's talking about our personal questions. So my question was on bad karma. So then I just gave a talk on bad karma and said what I have to say about it. So the best thing is asking questions and then also giving yourself the answer.
Yeah.
And Eric asks, how does one recognize a state of samadhi? I assume it's samadhi that autocorrect turned into samadhi, which is very interesting. So how does one recognize a state of samadhi in meditation? Is it something we should actively try to recognize?
You will recognize it as stillness and clarity of mind. The mind will be very awake and completely still. So contrary to what some people think, samadhi is not a state of blacking out or blanking out. Samadhi is not a state of narrowing or dulling of attention. Samadhi is a state of complete, sharp, vibrant alertness, but with complete, unmoving stillness of mind. Those are the two characteristics of samadhi. Stillness and alertness. It's very unmistakable.
Great, thank you, Bhante. And Jens asks, Venerables, thank you for your teachings and answering questions. In reading about mindfulness of breathing, it was stated it as a remedy to restlessness. I see and have experienced how metta addresses aversion, but it is not as clear how mindfulness of breathing addresses restlessness more than other methods of meditation. Can you share your thoughts on this? Permissible, maybe?
I mean, I'd say that one of the benefits of the last week has been seeing how you can approach Anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing, with, in these sort of through two routes. You can really use it as, if one has a very active thinking mind, at least in the initial stages, one can use the 16 steps to really explore the breath and engage the mind in a very wholesome and calming activity that taps into the body's energies and just the calming effect of the breath and of pleasure in general coming from that. And I think for people who do have this proclivity to think a lot and have very active minds, then that is very helpful because, I've used this image before, but if one tends to think a lot and just tries to, completely come immediately to one point or a very simple object when one is feeling really restless, then it's like yelling at a classroom of second graders to sit still, when they're really energetic right after lunch or something. Whereas this sort of active approach initially to the initial stages of mindfulness of breathing in terms of exploring the body, using applied and sustained thought or visualization can be a means of letting the mind, or these kids, in the analogy, run around the playground for a while before sitting down in quiet. And so if one has a very active mind, I know that Ajahn Lee, a famous teacher in our tradition, says that sort of active approach to Anapanasati is useful in the initial stages before one settles. So it can cure restlessness by working with restlessness or with that energy, and channeling it. However, if the other great thing about this week was that, we also spoke about these more simple approaches to these steps. And for one who tends to think less or just finds that their mind's ready to settle at a simpler object earlier, then that approach of really using the breath just to come to a simple point and or simple experience of calming and the natural in and out flow of the breath, bringing the mind to quiet is really wholesome. And that's, if the second graders are actually, fairly well behaved and interested in their subject of study right away, then why not have them sit down and do that earlier on? And Anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing, can work in both ways. But throughout the sutta, whichever approach one uses, there's always the refrain in that sutta that breathing in one knows or trains thus, breathing out one trains thus or knows. So there's always a soothing aspect to it, and the breath just has that quality that it really soothes the mind. So I think it allays restlessness in both of those ways.
Thank you, Venerable. And Mark apparently is a big fan of yours because he's asking, does the Venerable Kamisabo have an email where questions can be sent directly to him, also known as, so I don't have to deal with all the other monks from empty classes? I just go straight to Tanisabo. Well, I just posted in the comments Clear Mountain Monastery's website. That is the project of Venerable Tanisabo. So I don't know if he's going to reply directly to you at that email. We'll see. But what he does have is also his own YouTube channel where he does Q&A.
But I would recommend tapping into these sessions. It's nice to have the panel all together, I'd say. So yeah, and it's one of the benefits of these situations is like there's certain things where I can speak to from experience, and then there's others, and people have different character types, etc. So I find it very helpful to have to be part of sort of this monk chat is a new thing, but it's very useful, because people have different ways of looking at these things, and it's so I don't know, that's been a really fun part about being an empty cloud for me is these sessions. I wish we had more.
We will have more, and there's also more technology. But once again, check out the website and check out the YouTube link, and they also have him and Giancarlo also as part of the Q&A, right? Great, yeah, it's awesome. And Scott says, greetings, Bantes. I asked yesterday about the Jungian concept of the shadow. I personally do not engage with the concept. I find that greed, hatred, and delusion is a wholesome paradigm for investigation. If the Bhantes know, I would like to know what they think. Anyone of the Venerables wants to volunteer for the Jungian concept of the shadow?
Well, I'll just briefly say something aversive and grumpy. So
It's really not fun.
Oh, okay. I don't have very many positive things to say about Western psychology, so I should probably not speak about it.
I'm not sure what's meant by a wholesome paradigm that greed, hate, and delusion is. Seems almost contradictory. But yeah, I think if we want to talk about a shadow, I think that it's interesting that the Buddha just assumes that that these unwholesome roots are operative in the average person. It's just like, so if a person is not in touch with that, maybe they have this idea that they're pure and they haven't done the inner work, then I think to be able to be honest with oneself and not have them as a shadow, like hidden or something like that. So they're important to recognize: greed, hate, and delusion, and we might notice that one or the other is more predominant. But when I heard about the character types, I thought, well, I'm sure I have all three. I don't think it's just one. So I think to recognize them with compassion for oneself, if we're doing the work and we're not allowing them to take over our lives. I mean, if we see a tendency to be driven by a particular unwholesome root, then I think we really need to work at curtailing the behavior that's coming out of it. If we see our speech is harmful or our actions are harmful based on these unwholesome roots, then we have to really actively curtail that, to put some really strong effort to change the behavior. But if we notice that the mind is going in an unwholesome way, but we're not, I mean, eventually we will act out. But if we're seeing the activity of the mind heading in one way or another with the unwholesome roots, then to really just bringing the awareness to that and not let it to be, not suppress it and hide it from ourselves, but really to see it clearly. And then if we see ourselves acting out, then we can trace back to where that came from. So bringing awareness, putting a spotlight on it. I had this a metaphor that came up. It was like, if you have like in the backyard, there's some valuable things, and you have a motion sensor light, and a thief goes over the fence and into the backyard, and the motion sensor light goes on, and then he sees a sign that says, "Smile, you're on hidden camera." He's gonna like get out of there quickly. So if you go put the spotlight on, oh, there's anger. I see you, anger. Then a lot of times the anger will just be dispelled. If you just bring the spotlight on it and say, oh, I'm going through the servery and I see something that looks really delicious and I want to take more than I should. And I go, oh, that's greed. Then I can desist from that action actually too. So rather than being a shadowy side, I think we should really bring our awareness to it in a compassionate way too. I mean, not. What's encouraging about the Buddhist teaching is that, like I was saying, this assumption that these things are operative, and most people, unless they're arhants, maybe they're diminishing, maybe some of the permutations have been abandoned, but with the unwholesome roots, we have to. It's a gradual path. So to be patient. Not add more aversion to aversion or aversion to greed or aversion to our ignorance, but awareness, just bringing awareness to it. And sometimes we have to say, no, I don't think so, to them. Sometimes we have to be firm with ourselves, but we need to be patient with ourselves.
And then that's I think Bodhisattva's point also is well taken. And like I think Freud said, the best you can do is transform your neurotic misery into normal human unhappiness, which maybe is the paradigm of Western psychology. And I think Buddhism can actually give that's one of the great offerings of Buddhism, is providing like the articulation of wholesome mind states and positive mind states to the whole picture. But I do appreciate one quote from Jung, which was that what you don't acknowledge becomes your destiny. And I think some of us have suffering hiding at a deep level like that, something which really we have been running from. And I think the directive of the first noble truth to turn towards our suffering and comprehend it, I mean, you can apply it in everyday life little by little, but also sometimes there really is a deep and profound motion of the heart turning towards something which has been chasing us. And I think that's kind of the essence of the path in a lot of ways, is that initial willingness to turn and hold oneself steady while one looks at that. And I think that's much what meditation is. If one is sitting regularly, then these things will come up. And I think that's why we have spiritual community and the path and faith to hold us as we confront that. So I think for me, that is the shadow side. And like Ayasui Jana says, to shine a light on it is how it dissipates. But sometimes it takes a pretty big active effort to shine a light on it, you know.
So I will say one positive thing. So I really like the quote that you just shared of Freud saying, all I can do is turn your neuroses into ordinary unhappiness. So I'm going to add to that a Bhante Sujato quote. He said, Buddhism begins where psychology ends. In other words, Freud will take you from neurotic to unhappy, and then Buddhism will take you from unhappy to happy. But actually, if you start off with a bunch of neuroses and you just try to go directly into Buddhist practice, you might find that it's pretty difficult. So for people who have very strong mental disorders, then often it's better for them to get some therapy rather than sign up for 10-day intensive Vipassana courses.
Great, thank you all, Venerables. It was all very helpful. And Satira has a question. What is the most appropriate translation for Anamatagayam Bhikkhave Samsara? Is it more appropriate to say samsara has no beginning or no discoverable beginning?
Anamatagoyam Bhikkhave Samsara.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah, Anamataga, there's actually a lot of debate about how to properly translate this term. Bhikkhu Bodhi has an extensive footnote about it in the Sangha Nikaya. Anamataga, is that right? Anamataga Sangha, yeah, Anamataga. Yeah, I mean, without discoverable beginning, I actually think is a really wonderful translation. Without discoverable beginning. There's no, as the Buddha says, then he says, there's no first point that can be found. So the Buddha basically defines what that term means in the suttas where he uses it. Anamataga means there is no first point that can be found.
Thank you, Bhante. And Rosalinda asks, what are your thoughts on ritual practices? Tamisamo?
I think they're really, really useful. And I think people are profoundly hungry for them and don't realize. I think that, I think when people encounter these forms, initially they can seem archaic or, anachronistic, but you begin to practice them and when we bow to this image, we're bowing to the teacher, the teacher that the Buddha was 2,500 years ago, and to the teaching as embodied in the suttas and to the Sangha monastics. But we're also bowing to the ideal of awakening, to truth, and to what happens when that element of knowing knows truth in terms of it becoming embodied in a human, the Sangha. And I think we don't realize how much how much embodied action affects the heart. So if you bow to that image, to a Buddha image, every morning as soon as you wake up and every evening right before you go to bed, that will change your heart little by little. If you hold the 5 precepts and stop from hurting even spiders, then over 2 or 3 years, you will begin to perceive spiders as kind of cute. It's weird, but your heart will change little by little based on these embodied actions. And ritual is just, it's a game in a certain way, but we're already playing the game. I mentioned last week, like we have our altars, we have the things we worship, we have our little rituals, countless ones. The size of the TV that hangs on the wall, you don't get much more of an altar than that. Our rock concerts, etc. So we're already involved in all these things. So to really consciously make sure we're elevating what is worthy of elevating, to set aside a space in the house which is a meditation room, to build a beautiful shrine, these will affect one over time, and the props are important. We're trying to face what has chased us for our whole lives, and we need help to do that, and we need a structure to hold us while we do that. And I think people are much more hungry for that than they realize. So the structures and the rituals are beautiful if one conceptualizes them, and they will change your heart if you do that. So I'd say bowing, the more times you bow, I don't know, how many times do you bow a day, Bhante or Abhayagiri? About 100 maybe more.
I've never tried to count.
Yeah, a lot. And the Buddha, there's a great teacher who said that when bowing disappears from the world, Buddhism will have disappeared from the world. So give it a go. See how it fits.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Mochitamasu ka. And Elaine says, Soma heads up, Stan has a gift arriving soon. Anapanasati, Elaine. And Stan is wrapping up all that karma. Good deeds.
Stan? Live stream?
He used to do his cameos. See, he has to do very little work and has all this support. It's got very good karma, that little cat.
Yeah, he used to walk along the altar behind us while we were broadcasting.
Mm-hmm.
Attack the flowers, knock things over.
Yeah, as soon as there were things for Stan on the wish list, they were the first ones.
Well, this is called a metta magnet. He's generating. He's an object of metta for many people. So it's actually it's an important being in the world.
Yeah. His nickname was Ajahn Metta. And Eric asks, what are some of the steps one must take to become ordained?
Well, the number one step is to go to a monastery and let them know that you want to become a monk. And then they'll tell you what is expected of you at that monastery. Every monastery has its own particular requirements and procedures. Yeah.
And Denise, actually on the same note, asks, the Catholic Church has discernment retreats for women who hear the calling and want to know if wearing the habit is right for them. I did not know that. Actually, interesting. Do Buddhists have anything similar? Venerable Tibetan Children has Exploring Monastic Life.
Actually, a lot of organizations do that. Our friend Alex Madjar, he actually first went to a 30-day exploring monasticism retreat at Fogwangshan Monastery. Yeah, a lot of places offer things like that, but realistically, just go and spend a couple weeks at a monastery. There's your discernment retreat. You'll figure out pretty quickly whether or not that's what you want to do with your life. So we don't really need to have, so it's not, unlike a lot of Catholic orders, which are often cloistered, so you can't just go and hang out with them whenever you want to. Buddhist monasteries are usually much more open, well, except during pandemics. It's usually much easier to go and spend some time with monastics and see if it's what you want to do or not.
Great. Thank you, Venerables. And Angela says, where do I subscribe to Monkflix? Well, I think on YouTube, there's a button that says subscribe to Buddhist Insights channel. And there you got your Monkflix.
Rename things.
And Ajahn Brahmavara says, big gratitude for the excellent Anapanasati teachings recently, Venerables. Oh, so good to see you, Ajahn.
Is this the one who lives at Ajahn Ganha's monastery? The one we met?
Yeah, I don't know if she lives there, but she was.
Well, she was there when we were there anyway.
She wasn't she was not at Ajahn Ganha. We met her right before going to Ajahn Ganha. We met her at the Meiji place.
Oh, Meiji Sansani's place.
Great.
Oh, okay.
And it's good to see you again here. And Angela says, this is my first week renouncing dinner and hot showers. Ooh.
Wait, who said you have to give up hot showers?
I think Tanisa Bo. It feels surprisingly good. I feel lighter mentally and physically. So you're on the 9 precepts.
Nisabo 9.
Yeah,
Oh, that's cute. Nisabo 9.
Adding cold showers.
And Adine says, I'm from San Francisco and lived there then. But now I live in Portland. Ayasujana and I worked together in Maria's kitchen at Amararaki. We had some great discussions about Bhikkhuni ordination and other matters.
Yeah, the world of Western Buddhism is small. You keep running into the same people.
Yeah, that is actually quite amazing.
Well, this is the beauty of technology too, because I've been in California all the time and now I'm in New Jersey.
Mhm.
So I'm on the opposite coast.
Yeah.
So yeah, I remember Adine well.
Oh, lovely. Great. So sweet. And Bhavani says, witnessing so many deaths, suffering, all because of COVID as Buddhist monks or lay people, how can one take care of the mind and develop the mind? Venerable Suvijana?
Would you repeat the question, please? Because I
Yes.
missed a couple words. I couldn't quite understand them.
Yes, so my Italian English, it might be a little bit weird. So witnessing so many deaths.
Oh, deaths. Okay.
Yeah, and suffering all because of COVID as Buddhist monks or lay people. How can one take care of the mind and develop the mind?
Well, this is actually not an unusual phenomena for samsara. And I think to find a balance in the mind around the fact that there's so much uncertainty to life. We get kind of in this illusion of this comfortable pattern in our lives, and there's always death happening. And it's not to become callous to the fact that so many people are dying. I mean, it's unusual in the more recent history, and also with pandemics. There's been pandemics, but this is moving so much faster because of our mass transportation, air transportation, and the fact that we have this technology that gives us all this information from all over the world. So we're like, it's kind of like the impact is kind of multiplied because there's so many more people and there's so much more information readily available to us. So, But if we reflect that death is inevitable, we reflect that it may bring up compassion, but if we reflect, I'm trying to think of, my mind gets kind of spacious this hour, so that this, in samsara, this is not an unusual thing to happen. So we can have compassion for ourselves, because I think this kind of death awareness that the media gives us is very unbalanced. That it's either like really statistics or kind of over the top with bringing up people's fears. It's almost like it's like sensationalizing the news when it's really actually an ordinary thing in a certain way, that things are going to get an upheaval in society and in people's lives. We want it to always to be at this some kind of normal keel, and then floods happen, fires happen, pandemics happen. And so how do we balance our minds so that we're not thrown off by this? How do we care for ourselves? So that's really a good question, because it's something sometimes if we search inside ourselves, we might find the answer for ourselves. What it is that we can find to balance this out and not allow it to throw us off kilter. A lot of times working with the Brahma Viharas is really helpful. Even if it doesn't seem like we're doing anything in the world, if we're balancing our minds with loving kindness, compassion, and taking joy in what actually is still good in our lives and in other people's lives, and working with the equanimity, the balance of just really not resisting things as they are, resisting the nature of samsara to be so unpredictable, so difficult, so much, dukkha on a large scale. So I don't know if this is really answering the question, but
Yeah, I think it's good. Thank you so much.
okay.
And Scott says, I also have aversion to Western psychology. He was the one who asked the question before. And Alex says, are the identities of all authors of the suttas known? Which suttas would the Buddha be most likely to agree with completely? And do you think he might want to correct any others for accuracy? This is awesome.
Most of the suttas are assumed to have been spoken by the Buddha. A handful are identified as having been given by one or another of his disciples at the time. A certain small percentage of it I'd say less than 1%, are clearly later additions or were heavily altered at a later time. But yeah, I would say at least 99% of the suttas are pretty reliably accurate Dhamma that the Buddha would agree with, and much of it is probably paraphrased quotations of things the Buddha said. Some of it may be verbatim quotes from the Buddha, though that's debatable. But the flavor of Dhamma runs through over 99% of the material in the suttas. It tastes like Dhamma. And the stuff which doesn't taste like Dhamma, it's immediately obvious. Yeah.
Thank you, Bante. And Jacob asks, I'm a lay person who's trying to set up my meditation habit. This brings my potential teacher's worldviews to mind. How do monks view LBGT folks, which I assume is LGBT, not LBGT? I'm sure
you can put it that order too if you want.
I guess so. I'm sure this is a common question. Actually, we never had this question. I think because it's pretty obvious the answer when people tune into BI, but maybe Tanisabo, who's new to the community, can.
Wait, are they asking about this community or about?
I think in general, how do monks view LBGT, which might be another acronym.
I'm happy to speak to it, but also Pandit should also do.
Who do you want to speak to this?
Maybe everyone, since it's monks, not one monk.
So I'd say that. How do we view? Okay, yeah, just like we would view anyone else.
Great, is that an answer?
Yeah, well, I mean, the truth is that every monk is an individual person, so their views are their personal views. But if their views are in line with Buddhism, then they will be welcoming of people regardless of their sexual orientation or their gender identity. If their views are not in line with the Buddha's views, then they may have some prejudices from other sources.
Actually, Jacob is specifying, we'll say your community. So our community is gender inclusive. So yeah. Does that answer? You can also go on our website and our stance is, why make something a problem when it's not a problem?
Sadhu.
All right, that was, the last question. Unless something else pops up, you can
just
also,
2 minutes.
2 minutes for another Zen answer. Zen question to a Zen answer. Maybe Jacob has a follow-up. Who knows? Or maybe someone from the live audience.
Why do monks shave their heads?
Yeah. Bante?
Out of compassion for living beings, so that there's no living beings living in the hair, so you don't damage it.
That's a really good answer. That's great.
That's great. All right. Thank you so much, Venerable Surijana, for sharing that. And thank you to all the Venerables, Venerable Surijana, Bante Sudaso, and Tanisabo for sharing Dhamma tonight. So we will be meeting again next week, as usual, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 a.m. and 7:30 p.m. New York City time. And I think next week you'll see a lot of Tanisabo and Venerable Subhijana, because the rest of the monastic community will probably be recovering.
I don't be too, but I'll be on camera, so it's okay.
And as usual, every Friday we have monk chat, so you can tune in and ask all your questions Dhamma related. And Ki is telling Jacob, if you like to welcome to Rain Bodhi. Yeah, actually, let me put the link of Rain Bodhi before. One of the co-founders of Rain Bodhi is our good friend Venerable Akaliko. And actually, also a resident monk, Bhante Sumano, is also sharing lots of Dhamma with the folks at Rain Bodhi. Is that right? Yes, he's nodding, so it's correct information. All right, so we can end this evening with 3 sadhus.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
May all beings swiftly attain awakening.